Hello everybody and welcome back to Rebellious Menstruation. Today we're doing a bloody tale on the history of tampons. The earliest record of tampon-like devices were in approximately 1550 BC in Egyptian texts that were essentially tampon-like plugs that were made of soft papyrus, which is made from the papyrus reed and is infamous for making essentially paper. Around 500 BC, Hippocrates documented that Greek women wrapped wood in lint and used that as a tampon. The Japanese used paper and bandage-like wraps, and in Hawaii there are records of tampons created from ferns. There is also evidence in Indonesia that shows evidence of vegetable fibers being essentially transformed into tampons. Certain regions of India used a mixture of oil and rock salt along with some fibers. Some parts of Europe have blood moss, a European plant with a unique astringent and blood coagulating qualities. However, bear in mind that some of these have a shared history with bandages that were used for battle or war and then transcribed as being used by women for private use. So, some of the more recent developments come from medical texts and commentary. In 1860, R.G. Maine defined the tampon as, quote, a less inelegant term for the plug made of rag, sponge, or a silk handkerchief, end quote. A lot of research into this modern history of tampons is based essentially solely in America, and it ignores a significant amount of development in any other part of the world. This can be especially irritating as essentially applicator tampons are primarily used in America and the UK and practically nowhere else. While going or reading a significant amount of articles both online and in books, the articles online will be linked in the description box below. There is a significant amount of commentary but scant information. However, the word tampon derives from a medieval French word, tampion, essentially translating to cloth stopper. The earliest, what we would consider a modern tampon with a string, was made from harvested cotton and transformed or manufactured with the addition of the string was first actually seen in Europe. In the 18th and early 19th centuries, well, outside of, in the 18th and early 19th centuries, frequently these tampons were used or written about in text as alleged contraceptives and was suggested to prevent or reduce the chance of sperm entering the uterus. However, as we all know, you don't have sex with a tampon in, so I can't imagine that they were particularly comfortable in utilizing them for sex. There are texts describing the use of the tampon for menstrual flow as early as 1880, and the early 1800s indicate that Europe and the UK had these tampons and were discussing viable medical uses for them. The papers were written by men with no female input, and this type of information does show in the information that we have available now, because obviously the type of blood flow that men were experiencing is different than menstrual flow, usually obviously in different contexts such as war, and also at this point most physicians were men and most of the medical texts written were by men. Around the same time, around 1888, disposable pads were marketed as Lister's towels and developed by Johnson & Johnson, but these were in the public, so these were marketable pads, so these weren't personal use pads. I think a lot of this type of information is kind of lost because a lot of personal use cloth pads or dresses used in the home were not written about or discussed. But so Lister's towels were in the public and marketed as such. Nurses were also using wood pulp based bandages as found in hospitals, used to bandage wounds as they were highly absorbent. This material was also developed and the nurses obviously used them for their menstrual flow as well. And this then got developed into a marketable commercial option or early Kotex pads. So this was kind of the type of pads that we're kind of more familiar with today. Early brands of tampons, Fax, Holypacks, Modern, Woman and New Naps were all sold in the early 1900s. At around 1929, in around 1929, Earl Haas patented the applicator tampon in America, taken from a story. He was told by a friend told him about using a sponge internally rather than using external pads while they were on holiday in California. Being a physician and familiar with staunching blood flow, he utilized existing technology and existing products to create this applicator tampon. And due to the American societal norms of women being unable to touch their genitalia for any reason at all, and at no time were allowed to touch their genitalia as a social norm, that he created the applicator so that there would be no genital contact. This didn't stop the controversial nature of tampons, applicator or otherwise, in America, as it was considered severely inappropriate that young women and women in general touch their labia or vagina in any way. It was also considered to be inappropriate because it may break the hymen or may break their virginity. That's a myth that I have mentioned in previous videos as being false. However, this was obviously back in the 30s. Tampons were considered to be pleasurable to the point of orgasmic, proving yet again that male commentary on the female body without their input is ludicrously incompetent. Europe and Australia had no such notions of applicator tampons or the use of applicator tampons, because in Europe they had been using tampons obviously prior to the development of the applicator tampon. So they'd been using digital tampons, and they are still prevalent in mainland Europe, in continental Europe. So and basically Australia inherited a lot of this European context because of the UK. So essentially digital tampons are still prevalent even today, nominally due to not having the same avoidances of the vulva and vaginal areas, and also nominally because they didn't have such a social distance from utilizing tampons as a medical device rather than pretending that they were sexual in any way. So also they had issues with applicator tampons for hygiene reasons, that applicators are basically inherently untrustworthy and unhygienic and should not be placed inside the body. So it kind of went in a completely different direction. While America went for women should never touch their own bodies, Europe went for these things are unhygienic and should never be placed inside of women's bodies. So possibly a smarter decision to make. In addition, non-applicator tampons became prevalent as they were, or they're basically called digital tampons, became prevalent as they were more readily available in or across Europe. and that they are more environmentally friendly, more affordable, are smaller in packaging and size, and are easier to both insert, adjust, and place into the correct position. While promoters of the applicator tampons suggest that they're easy to use for new users to be comfortable, research suggests that digital tampons are easier to put in, adjust, and place, whereas applicator tampons do not necessarily have the best placement, and if you've removed the applicator, then you'd have to use your fingers to adjust that tampon, which kind of defeats the purpose of the applicator in the first place. So by the 1970s, self-adhesive pads replaced pads that had to be belted or pinned down, and increasingly plastic applicators were used over cardboard applicators. In addition, tampons and pads became more diversive in flow and absorbency, like light, super, and normal or moderate. So you had a lot more variety on the market and a lot more companies entering the market, and a lot more promotion of what different tampons did. They did become quite prevalent in diversifying what type of tampons were on the market, which meant, but that also meant that their design stayed relatively stable from the adhesive backed pads and the tampons in their absorbency mix. So they stayed pretty stable in design and function until an increasingly louder environmental movement has created a new wave of period product developments, such as underwear, swimsuits, bikinis, sheets, and the resurgence of both menstrual cups, which was developed in the 30s, and cloth pads, which was aided by a much more prevalent sewing machines in the home and cottage craft culture. So cloth pads have been obviously around for a long time, but they go in and out of favour with the rise of tampons and pads. They kind of reduced their favour from the hippie revelations in the 60s. They were a counterculture movement, but then they've kind of from kind of the 90s on, they have become increasingly in the marketplace, and specifically in online marketplaces. So there we go. Thank you for watching. Enjoy your morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are in the day. And I, of course, will see you all in the next video. Bye, everyone.